everyone. My name is Naima J Keith, and I am the Vice President of Education and Public Programs at LACMA. I am so honored to be here today to be in conversation with Jordan Casteel, a critically acclaimed but also brilliant and very nice artist who will be kicking off the series 5 Questions, 5 Artists. The format of this series is essentially that each of the 5 artists will be getting the same 5 questions. It will be an opportunity for us to hear how each of them kind of approach portraiture differently, responding to the very same set of prompts. What we hope to happen is that each artist will bring their own unique perspective to how they approach portraiture and the way in which that the portrait lives in the world. So I encourage you to not only check out our program today, but join us on this journey as we talk to all 5 artists over the course of the season. But let's get to Jordan. Like I said, Jordan is an amazing, brilliant, and very generous artist. And before we get into our conversation, I want to read a bit of her bio. Jordan is originally from Denver, Colorado, born in 1989. This was young. She elicits our underlying temperaments shared and anew. Composed with gestural brushwork and bold swaths of color, portraits and landscapes alike offer honest evocations. The artist received her BA from Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia in 2011, and her MFA from Yale School of Art in New Haven in 2014. In 2020, she presented a solo exhibition titled Within Reach at the New Museum with a fully illustrated catalog. Her work is currently in the permanent collections of SF MoMA, Minneapolis Institute of Art, Arts of Chicago, the Met, and many, many other institutions, including LACMA. And she lives and works in New York. I'd also like to add that she was recently awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant in 2021. Jordan, would you like to join me on stage? The virtual stage?
The virtual stage.
We are still here, girl, on the virtual stage.
I am. Now instead of walking, I just click a button.
Hit the button. Yeah. I know it's still weird for us to be in this space in 2021, but
but I'm really excited to be here with you, Naima. I think we have our own long history, and my beginning really was one of your beginnings at the Studio Museum. So it's really such a pleasure to be here with you and to talk about portraiture.
I know. So again, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sorry that you weren't able to join us this past weekend for the.
I had serious FOMO looking at Instagram. It was so sad.
I know. So while Instagram obviously currently can't just fully express all the excitement, I think that was going on this past weekend. I just want you to know just how much people connected with your work in particular, right? That we saw families. Even my son, he was just like, I see this and I see that. And he was just, I think families of all ages, I think we're connecting with the work in so many different ways. And so I think it's really special for us to kick off this series with a conversation with you.
Yeah, I love that.
So as I mentioned, all 5 artists are doing the same exact questions. But I think, starting the series with you in particular, is going to be really meaningful, because I think we're going to talk a little bit about your process, but also kind of what portraiture means to you. And then really just kind of talk about what it means to operate as an artist producing this kind of work in this moment right now. So let's kick off by kind of asking this question: how do you define portraiture? Which I know seems kind of obvious, but I'm really interested in kind of hearing your perspective on that.
I mean, I have to be honest, in preparation for this conversation, I think it really ignited a line of thinking that actually has been very true of my practice lately in thinking about what is portraiture. I don't think it's a silly question. I think it needs to be a constant question, especially as a maker, and I'm engaging in this practice and lineage. It's why am I doing this? Why is it important? What does it mean to make a portrait? Are portraits always including a physical representation of a figure? Or is it sometimes just representative of a human body or life or experience? Like, how much does our humanity and our personhood have to be involved in the image or in the process of making the image in order for it to be deemed a portrait? Like, has been really at the forefront of my mind, especially as you said, I'm young and I've had a practice that has evolved quite quickly, or at least the visibility of the practice has kind of grown exponentially over a short period of time. And I've always had to kind of be one step ahead of the people's definitions of the practice. So as writing occurs, I've experienced this kind of firsthand. I'm sure you have some experience of it too. Once one thing is written, so it be forever, because then everybody else goes back to that like one definition of what your work is, and then keep kind of building on that thing. And so a lot of the narrative around my work was like Jordan Casteel paints Black men. And that's like a very narrow definition of portraiture. And if I think about what my practice at that time, it was narrow and perfectly fit for me. I was so scared of everything else. I was like cozy and living my, like this is exactly where I want to be. But as I'm evolving, I'm thinking a lot about how to expand that definition. Thinking about how my body relates to the images I'm making. And are they all self-portraits? Like, maybe, because like I'm literally spending all my blood, sweat, and tears. Is like every work of art made by an artist, like ultimately a self-portrait? Could it be a portrait? Like they're all portraits of the artist, and the things that they're thinking about are deemed important. I don't know. So all which to say, clearly I'm thinking about this a lot. So,
but just, I guess it's interesting to hear, not to diverge from the 5 questions, but it's interesting to hear that your definition of portraiture has evolved, both in response to what's been written, but also the growth that's happening in your own career.
Yeah, I think, thus is life, as we evolve, the things we do and our passions and the things we care about evolve with it. As we become more informed, as we have more experiences, I'm a deeply, what is the word? It's like empathetic person. I'm like, very obvious word, empathetic. Like I feel things really deeply. And sometimes I have to work through those feelings to kind of create the definitions. And then I have to like push myself out of it, because I also get comfortable. And I think the thing about making work and saying I'm a portrait painter is like, that just feels too like there's a point where I'm just like, okay, I've done that for like a few years. Like that feels really comfortable. But I wonder if there are ways that I can expand or build upon that so that I can evolve and grow, because I want to do this for a really long time. And the practice is meant to grow, in my opinion. Like that's what I do every day, is like try to push myself to make new and better things.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, I think, speaking of kind of early articles about your work, especially kind of like really, I agree. I mean, those early articles really kind of described you as like, this is what she does.
Yeah.
But to see the evolution in terms of your technique and just kind of how you deal with those, I'll say deal with, but render those subjects, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it comes from my stubborn, as you're saying, I'm like, I think I'm also, I've never been good at somebody telling me what I am and what I'm not. Like, it's like the second I got that definition, I was like, oh, bet you think that's all I do? Like, let me remind you that I'm a woman making this work and I'm not a man, and like actually circumvent the way you're thinking about it, which has also always been the ethos of the practice, is like getting people to like reconsider their position in relationship to the work or the image maker. Like, where are your definitions coming from? Was the point of the work. And then they gave me a definition in addition to like my challenging their definitions, like I was like, wait a second, like, so, and yet that sentence still follows me. I think people still write things that say Jordan Casteel who paints Black men. And I think it's been like 6 years where that hasn't been true of the whole practice. So,
I just feel kind of bad about pulling the first image, which is
well, yeah, because they're still in here. You know what I'm saying? Like they're here. They've always been here, but so have I. I think that's been the thing, is like, which is why the question of like what defines a portrait, and I've been so attuned to like my personhood in relation to it. It's always been very important to me that these are about relationships, and maybe it's just that defines a portrait, is like the relationship between the maker and whatever it is that they're presenting.
So let's pull up that first image, Jordan 2020, which is not obviously like, but just to say that, you were talking about, putting yourself in the work and seeing yourself in the work. And obviously this is literally kind of what you're doing in this example. This is the work that we have on view in Black American Portraits. Can you talk a little bit about, and again, I feel like I'm diverging a little from the question. I can't help myself, but
sorry.
How you're thinking about portraiture with like literally kind of putting yourself in the work. Could we talk about some of the decisions that went into it? And then I want to kind of segue into what does it mean to make this kind of portrait in 2020, right? And then seeing this work in 2021. How do you feel like this particular portrait has taken on kind of a new meaning seeing it in this kind of context?
I mean, the really honest answer is I've never done very well with the intention being all on myself, which is partially why the practice for so many years has been so externalized and telling the stories of others and really identifying myself. They do, all of them feel like self-portraits, but like I mask myself through the stories of others and use other people's stories and likenesses and beings as like as a reference point for myself. But when 2020 came, I mean, we all experience a certain isolation. My practice is built on community. It is built on being in the world. And I wasn't. I was literally sitting on this couch basically all the time. I was coming to the studio, but my inspiration was built from I had to turn into myself. And it just felt so silly to not do it. I think there's probably quite a few artists. I'd be curious as like curator and like somebody who's like seeing the whole vastness of what 2020 looked like for artists. Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised if a lot of them did self-portraits to represent that time, because it was such a reckoning of self and what our priorities are. What are the things that we value? What do we see in ourselves? How do we value ourselves? How do we take care of ourselves and take care of others? And so I was really noticing in my own space the like things that feel like me, and some things are readily identifiable to the viewer, but others, like that thing on the floor, I don't know if anybody else would like it. Like kind of looks like a dead fish because it's like my heating pad, but like it's a microwavable thing, but no one else would know that. But I like look in and I'm like, yeah, that's my janky little heating pad that goes on the floor that has now been elevated through the act of like making this painting and me deciding that it's important for you to either know or not know. So I felt like this painting like had to exist. And as I look into 2021, I was really nervous about making this painting. I was nervous. My first instinct was like, I'm keeping this for myself and I'm never showing anyone. And now I've done the complete 180 and now it's on view at LACMA as a part of like a huge Black portraiture show. You know what I mean? Like I've like kind of, because I do think it's important to be vulnerable.
What changed your mind? Yeah, the vulnerability, this idea.
Yeah, is that I started with the intent of that vulnerability, right? Like I felt like I kind of had to see that through and that I needed to kind of push against my own inclination to hide. I think that's something I've really reckoned with in 2020 and 2021 is like, where do I fit in the narrative of Jordan Casteel? Like, where's Jordon, you know? And really thinking about more explicitly, like how I bring Jordon to the table as well. The person who is sitting at this table right now talking to you, like who had just rolled over from eating tacos and like, you know, like how do I bring my most authentic self to all the spaces that I'm occupying? And that's the thing I think through making this painting that I stepped into 2021 with more explicitly.
But you were also obviously very intentional, right, in the work, right? So we see nods to, you know, there's a Black male catalog, you're wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. I mean, there's very, you know, on one level, you're kind of bringing yourself literally to the work, but you're also communicating very subtly and very intentionally some of the things that you're thinking through in your space.
Totally. I mean, and all those things are literally sitting exactly in those positions, just like on the bookshelf. Like I didn't move things around.
Okay. I was going to ask.
I did, as you can see, like not all the books are like filled in, which was, I guess, sort of intentional. Like I kind of just painted the books that felt most important on that portion of the bookshelf. But they were all kind of like literally stacked just like that. Like the Van Gogh, and then it has like lupus, and then it's like taking the leap, and then like they're just, like you said, Black male, which has been super informative for me in the beginnings of my practice coming out of graduate school. A Little Life, like one of my favorite books. I mean, it's literally, it is a hodgepodge of like what I see and think about, but also just like it's like always on the periphery. Like I'm not necessarily referencing those books every day, but they're the things I've collected. And then they feel really intentional when you have them in a painting. And it wasn't necessarily that way.
Right. But also your posture though gives this sense of like you're almost kind of pulling away. Like so we see you and we're in this space with you, but there's also this sense that you're holding something. I don't know. You're in a position.
That's that discomfort. That's exactly. I think what you see is kind of like my still discomfort with like being like I'm doing this thing, but like also I'm gonna like tuck in. You know, like I'm not gonna be as open as I perceive a lot of the people who are represented in my paintings as being. I didn't think about it that way, but like Psychologically speaking, my therapist and I had a grand old time talking about this painting. You know, like it's like what was actually happening, what was I thinking
Yeah.
about, the things that kind of come to fruition in retrospect that weren't necessarily conscious decisions in the moment. But then feel very clear afterwards that are worth trying to understand, which is what I love about painting, is it slows us down enough to begin to see things that maybe we didn't see before in our relationship to items or objects or people, and the way that we hold ourselves. They become part of the story. And this will be part of my story
Yeah.
forever, potentially. So
No, it very much is, but at least just I think wanting to kind of get your insight into some of the decisions I think that went into why you included the heating pad or your
totally.
books or your posture or those kinds of things, but also just thinking about, like you said, how we were all in our homes and
Yeah.
really spending so much more time with either ourselves or with our loved ones in a way that was not planned, right? Like
Yeah.
just over in a second, we were all like in our houses.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally. And we were all observing different things about ourselves during that time, our habits, the things we liked or didn't like about our partners or children, or the thing, you know, like how do we navigate those spaces? It's like, okay, this actually doesn't work for me. Like, let's
right.
renegotiate that. Or this does work for me. Let's do more of that. You know, we had to sit with ourselves.
So how does the techniques or the thinking behind this work compare to other works, such as Wade, 2021, which we can bring up, or even Yvonne and James, also made in 2021? Um,
Yeah. I mean, there is there's a similarity in the way that the process has evolved over time. All of these paintings were kind of made within a year. I guess Yvonne and James was made in 2021 as well, at the very beginning of the year. And Jordan came towards the end of 2020. I think that the thing that is developed most from like my Visible Man days is like confidence. I think my own development in terms of material and understanding the material and understanding what I like and what I don't like about brushes. Like, these are my favorite brushes and I can be okay with that. Like, I don't have to like feel insecure about me only using 3 brushes most of the time and like running them ragged. Like, that is something I love. Every once in a while I try to introduce something new, but they all start with a color or an aura that defines the space. And I think over time I've become more clear about how to fill compositionally the frame. And that composition is developed over by looking or revisiting the images I took for my time with someone. So I'm like taking those images and I'm like spending time with them and then repurposing them onto the canvas to build the composition. And it's really like a very fluid thing. What I see in all of these, it is sort of, yeah, I just see like real growth. And that's not like a real clear answer of like something specific that's changed. I think I'm just in my head, and the thing that I'm experiencing most clearly is a change in my sense of like confidence and knowing and not second guessing myself as much, which means that like more fluid brush strokes happen at time. Or if I feel like picking up a palette knife and scraping the paint color on the back of that wall, then I'm like doing that, and it's like
right.
thick and it's luscious. You can't really see it on this, in this, but that's how that was applied. Or if I'm gonna I've been using more small brushes, so like doing the detail of James behind James. Like, there's a representation of the painting that I did of James originally while I was at the Studio Museum on
Mhm.
the refrigerator wall behind him, and that was something that like I just did with a certain fluidity that it's just fun. I think I'm just trying to have more fun.
Yeah, because you talk about, the evolution of your growth formally, but can we also talk about both in terms of your process, and
Mm,
how you talked about, like, you referenced Studio Museum, so in terms of how you meet your subjects,
yeah.
but also in terms of um, the relationship with your subjects. Has that
Yeah.
evolved as well?
I think they're like James, this painting of James is the third that I've done to date. So he's like the first person that I've followed over a period of time, that I met when I was a resident at the Studio Museum. He was the first person I painted. And then I painted him again with his wife, Yvonne. And then I painted him after Yvonne passed, the 2-year anniversary of her passing. I went to his house and I did this kind of painting in memorial of him in this kind of time and transition. So I think I've been thinking a lot about not only street casting, I think, thinking really broadly about the people who are in my life already and how to dig deeper within the context of those relationships. So I've been seeing opportunities to, like, whether it's within myself, so being aware that, like, I'm shielding myself by painting other people and then being like, okay, so you have to submit yourself to the same process, making a painting of myself, or doing the Yvonne and James where I'm thinking really explicitly about how do I take a person and give the viewer something more to learn, that there's always something more to learn about the people, the environments. As the environments change, I think the actual canvases have gotten bigger, which is like technical, but also an intentional choice, and thinking about the environments taking more of the frame, really wanting it to feel not just centered on the subject, but the places that they are, which has allowed room for some of the more landscape or cityscape images to come into view. That and thinking about portraiture and what a portrait is, that's like, I've been thinking more about storytelling. Like, what is the breadth of a story? And there are, different paragraphs, and you tell a story in a very kind of specific way. You have a climax, you kind of have moments of pause or reprieve, you have laughter, you have sadness. It's like, every painting is a piece of the pie that is I'm using like too many analogies at once, a pie and a book, but they're a piece of my journey, telling something complete, like they're all a part of something bigger. And that bigger, I think, is what I'm reckoning with, is like kind of my life and the people that I have tried to welcome into it and have gotten to know in different ways and then shared with others.
Is that, drive towards really thinking about kind of an arc of a story in some way or in any way, kind of response to maybe how the earlier paintings were being received? I mean, it's kind of feeling like people were like, okay, she met them here, she took a photograph, like that kind of very, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, how people kind of were like, this is what the paintings are.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to obviously
insert observation. Yeah, it might be. I think that what is true is that my painting practice, I am a very linear and like type A person. I'm like kind of an anomaly in that way. I like structure, I thrive in structure, but my painting practice is literally the one place where I like want no structure to exist. Like, I have a really hard time when people, or like it feels like the world or the environment's trying to like create a very specific linear way of being. I think it's because I recognize that this is a long-term, I'm trying to do a marathon run, like I'm literally trying to take this at a pace that is going to allow me the freedom to make decisions that feel right for me at any given moment. And that doesn't have to be what other people think is right for me or is defined by, what people are seeing and think that they know and understand. And that's the Jordon part too, like keeping the autonomy of Jordon within the context of Jordan Casteel and the paintings done by Jordan Casteel is like, I think I'm just really, yeah, it probably is. Those early days, every experience that like tries to tighten around me, I'm like, ooh, that feels a little tight. Let me try to bring it back out, Like, it's like, right. Let me remind you that I am a painter above all else. And I love paint. And I love the act of, like that's a thing that I think I'm trying to remind people of all the time, is like, as I'm a Black woman who loves to paint.
This idea of you having a relationship with your subjects, especially James, and this idea of wanting to tell this longer story and having multiple paintings that, that he appears in really intrigues me, because I'm trying to understand what your goals around kind of telling this larger story and letting people know that there's so much more to, let's just say James, for example, than what meets the eye. And then there's also like his story and your knowledge of him. How do those two things kind of reconcile, like versus like what you want to share of James versus what's, his own story and his background, knowing, like now that you guys have a relationship, kind of walk us through that, those choices.
Yeah, right? I think if I think about the three paintings that I've done of him, I think they pretty explicitly show in some ways like how my view of James has changed over time. In painting him the first time, he was by himself, sitting in a kind of nondescript, he was a man of Harlem, right? He was James, but he was more importantly a man of Harlem. He was representative of Lenox Avenue, of somebody in front of Sylvia's selling CDs, this like very particular experience of being near 125th. Then the second painting, once I got to know him, is I realized that Yvonne was his like other half. Like, she was always behind him. And the fact that I caught him on a day that she wasn't around was just like, I don't know what was wrong with the universe, because she was the one who dressed him. She was the one who brought him food, who was with him. Like, she always dressed him to match her. Oh yeah. Like, every day was like, he was dressed to match her. Like, that was her vibe. Like, she loved this man, as I have come to love this man, but she loved this man. And I realized I needed to do a painting. As I got to know him, it was like, oh, like, I really should do a painting of like Yvonne and James together. Like, I did a disservice in some ways to James, as I've now gotten to know James, by like painting him by himself with these like nondescript kind of items around him. Mm-hmm. So I did a painting of the two of them together in front of Sylvia's, with this like light coming from Sylvia's. It's not like super clear that they're by Sylvia's, but there's this like light drawing them in, and it's like warm, and it's like now become this other thing, because it has become this other thing to me. And then this last one is like, it's a little darker than other paintings I've done of him. It's like everything in me not even to cry and thinking about Yvonne, but like Yvonne's passing was really sudden, and my knowing of him has changed dramatically since her loss as well. And it was right before, so it was the 2-year anniversary. She had painted their whole house. Like, kid you not, like the oven is black right there, because she literally painted with black paint the entire kitchen, including the appliances. Like, all the appliances were painted black. Like, her hand was everywhere in that apartment. And there were these pictures of the two of them together, and this wedding picture, and like, there's a sadness that I like, a heaviness. Like, James is just like forever changed, I feel like, in many ways, very much himself. But I needed to do this other thing, and I needed to acknowledge where we started by having like that portrait of him on his own behind him is like very much where we started. But he had that, again, I didn't add any of this, you know, like, it's just like noticing. Like, it's like my ability to see him has evolved, but at the same time, he knew me. So he said, as I walked in, I wore this dashiki because I like the way that you paint like patterns. I know you like patterns. Because he's now come to know, now he's built a relationship with me as well, right? Like, he has built a relationship with my practice over time, and has now made a decision for himself about how he wanted to be represented, and knew that I was coming, and like wanted this thing a part of it. And in the very back are my shoes. Like, I implicated myself, like, talking about portraiture, like, I implicated myself in the frame really explicitly by like painting my shoes in the background that I wore, that I took off when I came in the front door. So it's like, I think in that sense, that's a thing I'm starting to become really interested in, because then there's this, it really becomes about relationships, you know, like, really, like, the narrative has always been, during, like, relationships are important to me in communities, but it's like, what does it mean to keep showing up for somebody, is also becoming of great interest for me, and keep showing up for myself, and noticing these kind of, the things that actually like hit in a really particular way.
No, thank you so much. I mean, again, I was very aware.
Sorry, that's a long answer, but
no. I'm saying I'm glad that we went on that journey, just because I'm obviously very aware of the other two works of James, again, particularly given our history in Harlem, and really just wanting to kind of understand how your relationship to not just James, but to your subject in general have kind of evolved over the years. I was really intrigued by that. How are you thinking about, because we talked about, you know, you're thinking around the past in terms of portraiture, your own journey. We talked a little bit about 2020 and how, you know, you're becoming vulnerable and kind of inserting yourself about the work. And now let's kind of think about the future of portraiture, and how you're thinking about, you know, the genre generally, but also, you know, how you're thinking about portraiture, and especially as it relates to artists of color and Black.
I feel like I chose this image in thinking about this question because as I think about what 2020 meant for Blackness, in particular, the loss and the grieving that occurred nationally and internationally for that matter, I've been thinking a lot about like our own survival and mental health and safety and peace, and where we find peace and safety. And for me, sorry, it has very much been my garden during 2020, which is like kind of cliche. Like I really didn't want to make this painting because like writing on paper, I was like, this sounds like I'm Jordan. I've been in a garden. I love my garden. Make a painting. You know what I mean? Like it was like, I didn't understand where this would fit. And yet I felt deeply called to make this painting because it is one of the few places in my life where I feel really at peace. And especially now, as my career has evolved, like painting and what my painting space feels like is sort of evolving. And my garden became this place of like learning and exploration and failure. There was a lot of failure and like figuring things out. And I think that what portraiture could mean for Black people and Black artists is the ability to make work that is connected to the vastness of our experiences that don't always have to hold the weight of a activist social justice standpoint. That we saying something doesn't always have to look like representing our pain, and or teaching somebody something, or like, you know, like bringing them onto the same page. I'm really excited because I think that is sort of happening, is the way that the art world is identifying with portraiture or Blackness and Black artists. And it's like trying to figure it all out by, in some ways, like consuming us quite literally. But in that consumption, my question is like, we have to kind of stay as true to ourselves as possible and not let the consumption become that box, that definition of what we need to be doing or what we have to be doing or making at any given time. That if I want to make a painting in my garden and I'm Jordan Casteel who paints portraits and I want to show this to you and say, this is probably, yes, you guys have the self-portrait on view, Jordon 2020, but in many ways, after I made this painting, it felt like a more honest self-portrait than I've made to date, because it felt so vulnerable in the context of my practice and what it was that I was going to allow people to see as an image maker from me in my studio. Like in this moment, to present this to people was like scary, to say, this is the thing I really care about in this moment. And I want you to see this part too. More, you know, just aligned as caring about James and caring about, you know, any other painting or person that I'm making and the stories I'm trying to tell, that the broadness of that story also comes to light in the like minutia of like loving, you know, whether it's our family or like the moment that you're drinking a cup of tea and, oh, that's me. Like, I love my moment with tea in the morning. Like, it's like, there are these very small moments that we move past. And I just hope that we get as much of like the minutia of Blackness and the portrait of Black life as possible in the future, you know?
Do you imagine, for you personally, this is the start of something in terms of you incorporating more landscape? I know you have other, like, you know, floral arrangement that's owned by Mocha and all these other things, but just do you feel like both in terms of either whether that's landscapes or either, like you said, these moments that these more intimate moments that reveal actually more about you than what a self-portrait would do? Do you feel like there's something you're comfortable doing in the future?
Yeah, I think I took this risk, and by taking that risk, I've learned something, and I have a lot more learning to do. I think this painting is something that I need to keep looking at and seeing what it tells me or what I need to experience from it. I think it will show itself over time, but it comes back to that sense of confidence, like where I started and where I feel like I am now, is that I'm starting to feel less scared that what I have is going to be taken from me at like the drop of a hat. I mean, I still have that fear every day. I'd be lying to tell you I don't, you know, like all of us have a certain amount of anxiety, but there's a certain confidence now of being like, you know what, like, forget it. Like, whatever, you know, I want to make this painting. They said they wanted 5 portraits. This is the painting I feel called to make. I'm making it. You know, like, and also knowing that that's okay, that actually by doing that, this thing has occurred that feels really new and exciting, and then became like the headliner of the show that just opened in London. Like, everybody's like murmuring about this painting, and I'm like what, like, but these portraits, like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, what is this? What is this thing? That's interesting. Like, I love the way you painted. Though I love the way you painted such and such, which doesn't come up as often in the like full figure portraits. Like, it's like, I love the person you've represented and the story it tells. Very rarely do I get the line of like, I love the way you painted the jacket. But I definitely get it with this, you know? And
I was going to ask you, in terms of, you know, formally, were there techniques that you had to use to make this work that you,
I was doing the exact same thing. You know, I was doing the exact same thing I do in all the paintings in terms of setting up a structure with the underpainting that kind of gets filled in over a period of time, and I'm working with a certain immediacy. Like all of those things were true here, in the same way that I build a portrait. And I think that's partially why I've been enjoying the fact that this does feel like a portrait. It doesn't feel dissimilar to the way that I approach a portrait. I approached it very much in the same way.
What do you hope people take away from seeing your work? And when I say that, I think about both the portraits, something more of a landscape. What do you hope that people walk away after having seen your work? And then, we can kind of go back to Jordan 2020, because thinking about seeing your work kind of generally, but specifically, what do you hope people kind of walk away thinking about in the context of Black American portraits specifically?
I mean, there's going to be so much that people are going to walk away thinking from that exhibition as a whole. Like, I think it's about the collective in the show in particular. It's like how my painting is situated in conversation with the mass amounts of work and brilliance being created by my peers right now. Like, that to me, my individual painting, like, sure, it's like kind of important, but it's like way more important in the context of this thing that's happening, and the way that this thing has been curated, and the way that it's going to bring people to see themselves, to experience all aspects of what it means to be a part of this conversation, quite literally, where they find themselves most connecting, and what's a portrait and what's not a portrait, where they're identifying with maybe the book on the shelf and finding that is telling more of a story than my gaze specifically. Like, they're delineating for themselves what is the most important and where am I in relation to the thing that I'm experiencing. It's how is my body relating to it? Do I care? Am I on my phone? Am I like, what draws my interest? And from that draw of interest, how do I kind of build upon that to do something next or different or better or whatever for myself? So like, my hope is that people, look at the painting and they're like, I don't know, I like it or I don't like it, but they feel something. I don't really care what they feel. If they feel something, even if it's the extreme negative, I'm not mad at it because it like did something for them or didn't, I think it's just about people being present with one another. And I love that this is all in communion right now. Like, we're all together, which is why for me, it's so important to try to get out to see the show, like, and why I long so much to be a part of the experience this past weekend. Because it is very rare that we are all together in one room. Like, very rare. Yeah. Quite literally and figuratively with our works and in our person, So it's a pretty special moment to be a part of.
No, I mean, definitely. I think to kind of our earlier question around, expanding the definition of portraiture and really challenging people to think about portraiture in so many different ways. I think that's what the show allows, right?
Yeah.
It allows people to really be inspired, and also, allows them to think critically about maybe their own kind of preconceived understandings of what a portrait is.
Exactly.
But I think your work in particular kind of allows us to really, like you said, think about those kind of quieter moments. Think about not just the moments you would have just kind of passed by, and now you're paying that much more attention to, both in terms of color, in terms of the subject, in terms of, all those types of things. And I think your relationship to the subject is one thing, but what we're inspired to do is think about our relationship to the subject, right? Like, we're really thinking about, would I have noticed that guy, sleeping on a subway? Would I just kind of like walk past him? But now I'm kind of noticing the nuances of his color, or the skin color of how comfortable he's feeling in the subway, all of those different things.
I love that. Exactly.
So that's so amazing.
Yeah, that's a dream.
We have quite a few questions in the Q&A. And so I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to...
and I'm hot, so I'm taking off my
all the things. So I will just go a few. The first question's around the production of Yvonne and James, the portrait we spent a little time on. How long did it take you, or how many sittings did it take you to finish that portrait?
Because I'm using photography, it is one and done. Like I'm spending maybe, I mean, I hung out with James afterwards, granted, like we spent some time together, but the actual like picture taking, I was probably 20 minutes, maybe 30 of me just like being like, yeah, hold that there. Oh, where do you want to sit? Like, let's play with this. And I'm just clicking away. And then it's the time that I spend in the studio that really allows the portrait to come to life. And I try to utilize tools such as painting like wet and wet, and within a certain time frame. Like I don't go back into the work and mess with anything really, or at all. So I think that's my way of trying to connect to like painting from life. So because of technology, I've leaned into the potential. Like these canvases are also so big that I'd have to like, I want to meet people where they are, for one. So that means I need to like go somewhere, and I'm not going to bring a 7-foot canvas into James's house. So, but I'll bring a camera.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting, so for those of us who joined us in real life on Sunday to hear about Amy Sherrill's process when she was shooting Michelle Obama for her portrait, she talked about, that she was with her for nearly 2 hours, in terms of like shooting all the different angles.
Yeah.
To the point of like having all these portraits, in this exhibition, or these 2 exhibitions, allow us to also understand the nuances in process, where
Totally.
you were kind of like, I went in, I took the picture, I want to meet people kind of where they are. Like there's a certain thing I'm trying to capture.
Yep.
Where, Amy was kind of talking about how she likes to spend a lot of time, kind of
Totally.
with her subjects. So just to say that, every artist has kind of a different way of approaching.
Totally. I try to make a point of like, they're involved throughout the making of the portrait, in the sense that I'm like sending images of like the progress, and once it's done, it's inviting them in and spending time with it together. But that's why I feel so a part of these portraits, because a lot of the time is mostly my decision making, not necessarily theirs. Although it's a collaborative thing, I'm like, I just want the images, and then I want to experience this thing and go back to work.
Speaking of other artists, another question that we got is your relationship to other painters like Alice Neal or Kehinde Wiley or others. Can you talk a little bit about
straight admiration? I think, I love, as you're even talking about Amy, like I think that the community that you build as a creative, and looking at those who have gone before us and those who have come after her, or our contemporaries or our peers or the people that we look up to, I think there is a sense of looking and longing and trying to understand that I feel the most connected to. They're inspiring me all the time. I love thinking about, like you said, seeing all the works together on the wall is an opportunity to think about how all those variations and process come to life. It's those intricacies that define who we are individually, even as we are telling a collective story. So I always think about the big thing that we're participating in together. And then I always really love moments where we can connect on more intimate levels, whether it's looking at a book or having intimate relationships with friends who are painters as well.
Mm-hmm. I want to, sorry, I'm not.
I know you're reading them.
Up, so I'm trying, so I apologize. I want to like get through as many.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I'm like, I want to ask her about this, but I don't want to.
Yeah. No worries.
Another question is around you talking about paintings of your students and how they fit into the development of storytelling.
I mean, they're perfectly situated as I'm having these conversations about more intimate relationships and like the span of time. Those portraits were done after knowing them for an extended period of time. A lot of them were, I think the majority of those students were getting ready to graduate that spring. And I had been working with them, nurturing them for at least 2 to 3 years. And so I had these really deep personal relationships, and the painting was a moment for me to kind of evolve with them. It also got me in their houses and getting to know them way better. Like all of a sudden meeting somebody's mom, you understand a person a whole lot better than you did before you met their mom. Like there's these things of knowing where I was like, oh, okay, like your mom makes really good beans, I'm gonna keep coming back, or whatever it is, like I could understand. I could understand why they show up to class and feel this kind of way, or I had a reference point for their life outside of life as a student and in the classroom with me for a few hours every week. So I think that sparked for me this like that feeling of wanting to kind of build upon relationships and thinking about them over an extended period of time. And a lot of them now are in grad school, and we talk all the time. And I definitely feel like in the next few years, it might be time to paint them again because they are evolving.
I was
Grad
literally
school's
going
doing
to ask
that.
you, I was like, do you see this as being something you would, think about doing, i.e. kind of like revisiting some of those subjects?
Totally, totally. I think there are some people where it will kind of like naturally happen because our relationships will evolve and their lives will evolve over a period of time. James, it's been almost 10 years now. Not 10. When was it? 2015, 2016? Feels like 10 years.
I
Six
know. I was
years.
like, girl, we're like aging
Yeah,
each
no,
other. I was
6
like,
years
wait.
ago, but 6 years ago is even a lot.
Yeah, no,
Like
man,
even then,
no, yeah.
like it's been quite a long time of knowing one another to make 3 portraits. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. And so, obviously people are really, appreciating you discuss your landscapes, and we kind of already touched on your willingness to kind of consider, whether or not to do more landscapes in the future. But also just commending you on, your vulnerability and your willingness to be vulnerable, both in terms of Jordan and then also in terms of the landscape painting.
I feel seen. Thank you guys.
You're very seen.
Yeah.
There are a lot of comments about. But another question is around your style of painting. So the question is, I'm really interested in your style of painting, the transparency and washes of bright color. Can you talk about this choice of style?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that style is just the process. I actually had a conversation with a friend just the other day about why they asked or commented on the fact that my brushstrokes, like they could recognize them anywhere. And I was like, really? Like, I don't know what's like really particular about them, except for I'm just throwing paint around. Like in my head, because when I'm doing this thing, like what style is like so deeply connected to just like me. And it's like my knee-jerk reaction in making a painting. And it's another friend who has like described it as basically building these like life-size coloring books where I like do these outlines, which you kind of see behind me. Like this blue is the outline, it's the underpainting, and then I'm like building on top of it. She's like, then you like fill in, which is basically what happens. It's like I build these outlines, I create an aura, I get rid of the white page as fast as possible by covering the whole painting in a color. I sketch wet and wet with, I have my brush and I'm wiping and sketching the outline. And usually that happens in a day, maybe 2 max. And then I'm just like going for it. Like her whole face would have been done in one sitting of maybe 3 hours. And then I don't go back into it. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that mainly because you, there's of course the confidence that you got the first time, but around, that seems like a very intentional choice, right? To be done with something. And
it's been the thing I've been doing all along. Like even those visible man portraits, like that's how I was making those paintings. And a lot of it was thinking very explicitly about how, if I'm going to take a photograph and I love painting from life, how do I keep the thing that I love about painting from life true when I have a photograph in front of me? And a part of it that I found working for me was that by working within certain time constraints, I don't allow myself to overthink. I can't overthink. I'm like, I have X amount of time before I have to leave here to go home to have dinner, and I need to finish this face. So here I go. Like, I'm like in it, I mix all my colors in advance. I do everything to kind of set myself up for success, mise en place style. Like I've like chosen my colors. I have it all on the palette. And then my headphones are on and I'm just painting. And mistakes happen or things are wonky sometimes,
Yeah.
It's not about a realism in that way. It's about like me recalling and working with my kind of intuition really explicitly when making the work.
But so there's not necessarily a lot of improvisation. If you're thinking about color ahead of time, you're thinking about, obviously you've already, photographed the subject. Like there's a lot that I don't want to say kind of pre-planned, but there's a lot that you've kind of figured out ahead of time.
Yeah, totally. And then when it comes to the actual mark making, I haven't figured that out at all. I just start with a color and then just start mushing things together and like responding. It's like a call and response at that point. I'm just trying to figure out what the image needs, how to make it feel like the person. If it isn't working, how do I kind of like mush a different color up against this one color to like bring it to life? It's just looking at shadow and color and the way that light is functioning at that point.
And then how and when do you decide, or when do you decide to bring yourself into the work? Again, thinking about, the inclusion of shoes, or, just like little nods to your, obviously it's your hand, but just in terms of
Yeah.
how and when do you make that decision?
It's not very often. I think that's why the shoes was kind of like a very rare moment. It's not like even in the portrait behind me, like I guess I could put like little footprints in the snow or something that would show it. But I guess I've never really thought there. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, nor have I had as many experiences in the paintings where that happens outside of my mark making and that kind of like time.
And then can you also talk a little bit about your relationship to color? And, I know, especially for painters of color, where there's just a lot of attention being paid to how one renders skin color and skin tone. And now, especially with the Black American Portrait exhibition, to see the range of how artists can depict, especially subjects of color.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about not just skin color, but I think your relationship? I'm obviously looking at the painting behind you and your choices around those particular shades of blue. So can you talk a little bit about how you approach color? What does color do for you?
I mean, I think color is a tool to evoke certain emotions or certain feelings or memories or recall in our very kind of like specific human experiences. It feels like I do a lot of planning, but the color part is like very intuitive. Like I'm using, like, they're all over my desk, these things called color aids. I'm literally just like pulling from a pile a series of colors, finding one that be like, ooh, this one feels good. It's like holding a stone, like a gem or something, and being like, which one gets your energy right? There's this thing that happens where I like pick up and I'm like, that's interesting. I'm gonna set it aside. And then I try to find the other colors that help tell the story that color needs as an anchor, whether it's thinking about light or dark. And skin and blackness, I think it's being fearless around what skin looks and feels like as a part of blackness and the Black identity or people of color in general. I think I've just allowed myself to like pull a blue and be like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out. Like, I'm not exactly sure how this like is a shadow, but it feels like it needs to be the shadow for this painting. So like, what do I need as the supporting actor to like make this blue really shine? But it is just like a certain fearlessness with color. Like I refuse to kind of be limited too much by an expectation that others might have on what blackness is and the skin tone and the experience. And artists like Kerry James Marshall, like OG, who very much like inspired a sense of that. Like he can be like, you guys, like, you want to see black? Let me show you black, like literal black. Let me show you the variations of black. You think black is just this one thing? There's Mars black. There's like blue black. There's all sorts of blacks that are going to tell my story. And I just feel like there's all sorts of colors that are also going to tell mine. So, yeah.
So thank you, Jordan, for allowing me to go completely off script. I'm like, we have a script, but I'm like, I can't help it. Right? Just to say that, because there is just so much depth and, so much, I think, to tease out of your work. It would almost feel like I was cheating if I just stuck directly to these questions. But again, thank you so much for your generosity and your time. And, I just want to encourage everyone out there to, if they haven't already, to come see your work, but obviously the entire exhibition, which is through April here at LACMA. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is such an honor. It's a perfect kind of thing in the middle of my day to like, I feel inspired. So I needed that. Me too. I know. Before this, I might have been like half asleep, but now I'm like, let's go. So it's good.
Again, thank you so much, Jordan. And
thank you.
I just want to plug the rest of the series: 5 questions, 5 artists. I guess now 50 questions, 5 artists. Like I said, that all the entire series or the dates for the series can be found on lacma.org. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye.